Our next speaker has kindly agreed to answer a few questions regarding enterprise-grade DLT platform implementation in one of the largest market infrastructures. I'm delighted to invite Timothy Hogben, the CEO at ASX. Hi, Tim. Okay, that's it. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us. There were several recent announcements highlighting ASX work at the forefront of market infrastructure technology and blockchain implementation. And we've heard there is a confirmed plan now to replace clearinghouse electronic subregister system, or CHES, used by ASX with a new platform based on distributed ledger technology. So can you please explain your role at ASX and describe the state of the project, maybe on a high level?
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me here today, Joseph, and good to hear from one of our other partners, Sonova. And just with Exactpro, just to touch on that, we put in a new trading platform about 18 months ago, and Exactpro were our partner in doing a lot of the non-performance testing, and I'm very pleased to say we've had excellent results from increase in volume and data analytics out of that platform, and we haven't had an issue to date. So touch wood, all went well when they smashed the system for all that non-functional testing they did. So it was a good result. So I'm the CEO at the Australian Securities Exchange. My main responsibility is for the live environments, and I run technology in the operation groups. We have about 6 licenses across trading, clearing and settlement, and I run a large data centre co-location facility for the exchange as well. So we're, like most exchanges in this world, we're a global market. We're open 24, about 5.5 days a week, and we compete very hard in a very competitive space. The exchange space is a very competitive space. We are a top 10 exchange globally, and we do that really hard from an innovation perspective and using technology really well. So we can't afford to have mistakes and make mistakes with our choices. And you know, we are about 1/3 of the size of other exchanges from a people perspective. So the use of technology is significant in our footprint. In saying that, you know, we've certainly gone down a path and taken a leadership position in blockchain technology. Quite rare for the exchange. We would normally adopt, I think as was spoken earlier today, about mature technology and proven technology. But we saw back in 2015 when we were contemporising some of our post-trade environments that, you know, that the hype and the commentary in the market around blockchain, that we would have been quite naive if we didn't explore the opportunity at that time. So we spent about the past 2 years looking at that technology. Now, normally we would spend probably 3 to 4 months looking at a piece of technology. It's been about 2.5 years now looking at the blockchain technology or the distributed ledger and how that could potentially be a candidate to replace an equity settlement platform in Australia. I'm pleased to say that we announced last December that we will use the technology, the underlying technology, to replace the settlement system that we have today. And this is a big step. Obviously, the world is watching, mainly from the use case being an enterprise use case. There's lots of use cases out there that are looking for problems to solve. We've got a problem that we need to solve in Australia in the post-trade environment, which is extremely complex. And that problem isn't what traditionally people are talking about in the market around trust and these public blockchains where they're going to disintermediate some centralised body that sits in between two parties. What we're trying to do is provide a platform which we achieve data synchronicity. And this is just critical for post-trade environments and managing the complexity of those environments, that the data that you're relying on to feed the clearing systems, as we just heard of there, or feed the repositories or feed the corporate actions, is of the utmost integrity. And we have certainly seen through the subset of, I guess, functionality which we've gone through enough in it to realise that not only can it provide critical market infrastructure, but it also provides for a lot of opportunity in the post-trade space off the back of that as well. So we're on the path now. We're looking for about a 2021 implementation of the technology. It will be, as far as we're aware, the first enterprise critical market infrastructure adoption of that technology. And we're certainly involved with a lot of other exchanges around the world in adopting that type of technology now, in taking that leadership position.
Okay, thank you. And what were the biggest learnings from the 2-year-long evaluation process for replacement chess with DLT?
Well, there were lots of learnings. Probably the main few, if I could just name a few, were certainly the non-functional aspects. So really the only adoption of blockchain technology had been in the cryptocurrency space. So Bitcoin, for example. A good example of that from a non-functional perspective is they process about 7 transactions per second. Now, if we're talking at an exchange level where we've got auctions pumping out 500 to 2,000 trades per second into a post-trade environment, obviously that technology wouldn't suffice what we need to build in our type of infrastructure. So looking at all those non-functional aspects from scalability, reliability, throughput, security, privacy, confidentiality, all of that stuff was just highly critical. Obviously the regulators that sit above us are very interested in that aspect as well from a stability and resilience perspective, but really going down that path with our vendor Digital Asset and having enough know-how and skill and expertise amongst our people to not only think about these type of non-functional aspects, but then to test them in an environment that not only would test the veracity of what Digital Asset, our vendor, were telling us, but also be able to put our hands on our heart with our regulators and stand in front of our board and say, you know, this thing isn't going to fall over. You know, it can handle, you know, multitudes of business we're handling today. And in 5 to 10 years' time, this thing will still be doing what it needs to do on a day-by-day basis. So certainly that was a big aspect of it. Probably the second one was, I would say, just the heavy lifting of a piece of infrastructure like this. So the reason the world's quite interested in what we're doing in Australia is because we're building out this capability at an enterprise level for which we're going to see a lot of innovation and new business stem off the top of it. So I use the examples of, you know, Amazon is a perfectly good one. You know, they didn't come to the market and build a postal service. You know, the internet, all the startup companies we know today, tens of thousands of startup companies, they were able to do what they do because the internet existed. So what we're doing with this blockchain technology is effectively that heavy lifting of putting a piece of infrastructure in, and it's a real-time, replicated, synchronous, shared database of information that people can rely on as a golden source of truth with security built in on top of it. So what you're giving then is the market and whoever is party to that environment the ability to take and trust the integrity of the data in there, and trust that they are the only ones who can see that data, and trust that if they're building tools on top of it, the data governance layer which sits on top of that is where it needs to be as well for using that data off of that golden source as well. So they're probably the two biggest learnings. Obviously, there's many after 2 years of exploratory work, I guess, but you know, having a few people today have spoken about having, you know, the business involved in the testing and having your test engineers sit with your business and the business sit with the, you know, the developers, and having all these types of environments set up. When you're going down the path of new technologies, I think it's really important that you consider what type of operating model you want to actually facilitate that. And for us as an exchange, that was a big change from really what was a waterfall shop into a more agile. I wouldn't say we're quite driven to agile yet. I'd probably call it agile, half agile, half waterfall. But you know, it certainly changed the way the exchange operates from a delivery perspective.
Okay, thank you. The next question is connected with the with the comparison of the implementation in Amazon Web Services platform and ASX hosted environments. Have you spotted any difference, maybe?
once again, for me to stand in front of the board and say I was going to punch all this data into a external virtual environment, and our board, obviously very conservative, they like to go in there and touch the servers and know that it's all there and I can feel it and I can see it and I'm all comfortable with it now, okay. To say that we were going to start using these other services that, wouldn't be located potentially in our environments was a big step. And, the real benefits in the sell point was really that, Digital Asset being the software vendor, they were able to use these types of services, these virtual environments, to actually help us set up our own hosted environment. So it provided them with the agility to actually test the configuration and the architecture of these new technology. So when we went and started building our testing capability off the back of that, they had already done a lot of the hard work in avoiding some of the pitfalls of setting up some of these environments with these new architectures and technologies. So that was very positive. The second one is obviously the reduction in cost of hardware when you're doing non-performance testing. So load testing, for example, and the ability to horizontally scale up at any point in time and move that dial whichever way you wanted to was extremely significant for us. And it's a fantastic use case if anyone ever needs one for the use of cloud in testing out a new technology and being able to actually move that dial back and forward without the cost of building out the underlying hardware to be able to do that. So that was obviously a very positive experience before, and as Alexander touched on before, that the ability to have multiple environments running off the same code and infrastructure is standardised all the time. You can't underestimate that, and obviously we have a testing team, say, of about 30 on board at the moment, looking at this stuff, and for them to be all operating in a virtual environment and then to bring that together overnight onto the one code track has been a very big benefit for us from using cloud services.
Okay, thank you. And I believe there are also questions from our audience. Okay, so please. Okay, thank you. Do you need?
How do you think the presence of single source of truth might affect the customer testing in the distributed environment?
It's a good question, and we will go into our customer test phase in Q1 next year, and we'll obviously run multiple environments around vendor testing and industry-wide testing and pre-prod type testing as well. The big issue for the customers, and it's a bit of an issue for us as well, is with blockchain technology, you change the way people interact with you. So the old message-based models of an input and an output, they're going to disappear. I mean, if blockchain all of a sudden becomes the fabric of everyone's database infrastructure, well, the traditional models of message-based, putting something in, getting something out, that ain't going to happen anymore. People can interact directly with the central source of the database and the truth. So equipping our customers with that capability to be able to do that is a big challenge for us. We have numerous consulting firms in Australia now that are building out capability. Of course, they're seeing a huge opportunity in learning what is the language of blockchain and what is the smart programming language that sits on blockchain. And they're obviously seeing the opportunity to get in there and train the customers about how then they can test and build this technology to their advantage. But it is a really big challenge, and it's going to be a big challenge for us next year. And it's mainly because of that way people will interact with the system and the platform compared to historically they may have done that. So that's probably the largest challenge from a customer perspective. There's also a lot of benefits though, because you're working with that single source. They can have a copy of that database literally sitting on their desktops, and they can be completely confident on a real-time basis that while they're testing in these environments, that it is replicating what is happening within the exchange process. Like no batch runs, it's all real-time, no message-based toing and throwing and all this type of stuff. It is actually happening on a real-time basis. So that's got to be a positive perspective as well.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, Tim. Can Can I ask that at the moment you've got two matching engines, the Cinnober and the legacy NASDAQ that you've retained for the equities business. Do you imagine that not today, not next week, not next month, next year, whatever, but over time, as you say, moving from a message-based infrastructure to a blockchain infrastructure, that your use of matching engines will kind of be submerged into a blockchain of some sorts, in the sense that it will all be blockchain rather than being, here's a unit that does, order comes in, matches with another order at limit or whatever. Do you see it going that way?
I mean, I can't see it that way in latency-sensitive applications. Blockchain doesn't have the capability as a lot of those latency-sensitive applications provide. And that's mainly the way things are written onto the database per se. I can certainly see uses for it in off-market type transactional business or bilateral type business. Certainly bringing buyers and sellers together, moving to a more peer-to-peer type of environment, yes. But we certainly haven't done any work, and I don't think Digital Asset have either, on the pre-trade environment and the trade environment for use of this technology, because there would have to be significant performance uplift in the way the architecture is stacked at the moment. But certainly in that post-trade environment or any type of asset, you know, the blockchain is asset agnostic. I mean, we've built our blockchain capability. I could move cattle, livestock, insurance, sheep. I mean, equities is our first case we're going to put on there, but we will certainly be looking at, you know, debt and fixed interest and derivative type products as well that will move on to it in the future.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, yeah.
What is your point of view on the impact of DLT implementation on collateral management process?
Collateral management. This is probably one of the areas it can really enhance the risks involved in collateral management. And the two areas I see being most significant is, and we saw this through the financial crisis, was the rehypothecation of collateral or stock throughout the industry. So I'm borrowing, then I'm lending that piece of stock, and it goes on and on. When we saw Lehman's and that type of situation, they didn't know where the stock was held or where the positions had moved to. There were it passed through so many layers and hands that the ability to call back collateral or the value of, you know, the stock had been lent had just been lost, and the timing of that. So blockchain provides that immutable record of a transaction basis. So quite significant in collateral. The other thing we're really looking at the exchange perspectives now is, with collateral, how can you retain the ownership of the collateral in the lender's name, but pass on the entitlement of that collateral to someone who needs it, so the value, etc. So without losing that entitlement at the lender's level, and that's really important for corporate actions. So as you know, at the moment, when the collateral's used a lot, that it's often called back in times of corporate action, so the lender actually receives the entitlement. So how can we retain that with the lender and give them the corporate action entitlement, but retain the value of the collateral with the person that's taken or borrowed that collateral in the first place? And we think blockchain technology provides for that capability, and we're certainly building out that capability in Australia at the moment, which will be a significant win in the marketplace around collateral.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, team. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you.
Okay.